Let me tell you a story about betrayal, a hidden ledger, and a silence that spoke louder than any boardroom shout. This is the story of how I lost my company to save my son, and how the deepest secrets are the ones we keep to protect the people we love. This is what happens when a mother's heart and a founder's resolve face their greatest test. My name is Eleanor Vance, and I am 70 years old. Let me tell you a story about betrayal, a secret, and the unshakable strength of a mother's mind. It began on a Tuesday in my office, the one with the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city I helped build. The light was hitting my desk just so, the way I liked it, warming the polished wood I had chosen 40 years prior. I was reviewing quarterly reports, the numbers a comforting and familiar language, when my son Michael walked in. He didn't knock. That was my first clue. He was 40, dressed in a suit that cost more than my first car, his posture rigid. His eyes, my late husband's eyes, wouldn't meet mine. Instead, they scanned the room, my room, with a cold assessment that sent a shiver through me despite the sunlight. "Mama," he said, and his voice was too steady, too rehearsed. "We need to talk about the future of the company." I closed the folder slowly, buying a single second to steady my breath. "I am the future of this company, Michael," I said, my own voice surprising me with its calm. "I built it from a corner of our kitchen table." He finally looked at me, and there was no warmth there, only a pity that felt like a physical slap. "Not anymore," he said. "The board and I agree. It's time for new energy, modern strategy." He hesitated, searching for a word that wouldn't sound cruel, but the truth was in the pause. "You're from a different time." The words hung in the air between us. Different time. They meant my time was over. He laid out his plan with crisp efficiency, a graceful transition, an emeritus title, a lovely office on a lower floor with a view of the garden, a gilded cage. He spoke of my legacy, of honoring my work, but all I heard was erasure. I listened, my hands folded neatly on the desk, the emerald ring my husband gave me feeling heavy on my finger. I thought of the thousands of decisions made in this room, the battles fought, the sleepless nights, the triumphs that tasted sweeter than anything. I thought of the small boy who used to crawl under this very desk with his toy cars, who I'd shoo away during important calls. That boy was gone, replaced by this stranger offering me a quiet retirement. I said nothing for a long moment. The hum of the city below was the only sound. I knew this day might come. I had seen the looks in meetings, heard the whispers about succession. I had just never believed the push would come from him. "Not my Michael." Finally, I nodded, just once. "If that's what you and the board have decided," I said. My voice didn't crack. I wouldn't let it. The relief that washed over his face was instant, tinged with a hint of surprise at how easily I'd capitulated. He expected a fight. He expected tears. He expected the emotional mother he thought he knew. He did not expect the steel. He began talking about logistics, about moving my personal items, about a press release. I nodded along as if in a daze. When he finished, he came around the desk as if to hug me. I stood up, stepping slightly back, and offered my hand instead. A business handshake. His confusion was brief. Then he took my hand, his grip firm and final. He left then, closing the door softly behind him, a courtesy he hadn't afforded on entry. I stood in the sudden, immense silence of my office. The sunlight felt different now, harsh and exposing. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I walked to the window and placed my palm against the cool glass. I looked down at the sprawling business district, at the buildings that bore the mark of my ambition. This was not an ending, I told myself. This was merely a change of terrain. He thought he had the keys to the kingdom. He had the shiny new keycard to the front door. But he did not have, and would never have, the combination to the old, unmarked safe hidden in the foundation. He didn't know about the ledger. That's what my lawyer, Charles, and I called it. Not a file on a computer, not a document in a cloud. A real, physical, leather-bound ledger. Its existence was known only to two people in the world. Me and Charles. For 30 years, since the company grew beyond my wildest dreams and the vultures began to circle, I had maintained it. Every handshake deal, every gentleman's agreement, every whispered promise made in confidence, every source of true leverage, Every single thread that actually held the tapestry of my empire together was recorded in my own handwriting in that book. The numbers in the official reports were a performance. The ledger held the truth. The partners who were loyal to me, not the title. The debts of gratitude that were worth more than signed contract. The vulnerabilities of our fiercest competitors, the real profit margin. Michael had the software, but I had the soul of the business. He could run the machine, but I knew every hidden gear and why it turned. As I stood there, a strange calm settled over me. He had made his move. Now it was my turn. The game was not over. It had just become infinitely more interesting. I picked up the phone, the old landline on my desk with a secure line. I dialed a number from memory, one I hadn't needed to call in years. It rang twice. A familiar, gravelly voice answered. "Vance resident," he said, the old joke between us. "Charles," I said, my voice low and clear. "The weather has changed earlier than expected. We'll need to consult the old almanac." There was a beat of silence on the other end. "I understood, Eleanor," he said. "The usual place? Tomorrow. 10 a.m., I confirmed. "And Charles, bring the book." I hung up. I took one last long look around my office. Then I picked up my purse, my back straight. I walked out, past the assistants who couldn't meet my eyes, past the new logo on the wall he'd already commissioned. I didn't look back. I had work to do. The real work was just beginning. The next morning, at 10 sharp, I was sitting in a corner booth of the Oak Room, a restaurant so old and established it felt timeless. The dark wood paneling and low light were a comfort. Charles was already there, a cup of black coffee steaming before him. At 75, he was lean and sharp as a tack, his eyes missing nothing. He stood as I approached, the old-world manners that our partnership was built upon. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm with concern. He didn't ask how I was. He knew. He slid a worn brown leather satchel across the tufted seat beside him. I ordered tea, and we made small talk until it arrived, two old friends having a quiet breakfast. When the waiter retreated, the atmosphere shifted. "The ledger is safe," Charles said without preamble. "It's where it's always been. No one has asked about it. No one even knows to ask." "Of course they don't," I said, stirring my tea. "Michael believes all power is digital now. He thinks if he controls the servers and the bank account, he controls everything. He doesn't understand that real control is in the mind in relationships older than he is." Charles nodded, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "What's your play?" I took a slow sip of tea, the heat fortifying. "For now, I do nothing," I said. "He has asked for a smooth transition. I will give him one. I will move out. I will smile for the cameras. I will hand over every password, every key, every official document he asks for. He will think he has won cleanly." And then, Charles said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "he will start to bleed." "Precisely," I said. "The business is a complex organism. It has been running on a certain rhythm, a certain understanding, for decades. That understanding was me. It was my phone calls, my lunches, my memory. He will cut out the heart and expect the body to keep running. It will stumble, it will falter, and when it does, his confidence will crack. He will look for solutions in the data, in the consultants, in his new young executives. The solutions won't be there. They are in here." I tapped my temple, and in there, I gestured to the satchel. We spent the next hour in quiet, intense conversation. We didn't open the ledger. We didn't need to. We both knew its contents by heart. We spoke of names, of alliances, of clauses buried in ancient contracts that would become relevant. We mapped out the pressure point. Charles would remain the company's lawyer, of course. His position was unassailable. But his true allegiance, forged in the early, desperate days, was to me. He was my eyes and ears inside the machine. We parted with a plan, not of attack, but of quiet observation. I went home to my apartment, a spacious, airy place filled with art and light, a sanctuary. I did not feel defeated. I felt focused. The following weeks unfolded exactly as I predicted. There was a farewell party, awkward and full of strained smiles. Michael gave a speech about my pioneering spirit. I gave a shorter one, wishing him well, my voice gracious. I moved my personal effects to the Garden View office. It was, as promised, lovely and utterly powerless. I sat there some days and read novels. I let everyone believe I was retired. Meanwhile, Charles's reports came, discreetly. Michael's first act was to restructure, to consolidate power under his hand-picked team, a team that included his wife Chloe. Ah, Chloe. I had seen her influence growing for years, ambitious, shrewd, with a taste for the glamorous life my son's position could provide. She had never liked me. I represented an old guard, a frugality, a substance-over-style ethos that cramped her aspiration. This coup had her fingerprints all over it. She saw me as an obstacle to her version of the family legacy. Michael, eager to prove himself, began making changes. He renegotiated terms with a longtime supplier, squeezing them on price based on a spreadsheet analysis. He didn't know that supplier's owner had stood by me when a fire destroyed our first warehouse. The loyalty wasn't in the contract, it was in the handshake. The quality of materials slipped. Production delays began. He let go of my head of sales, a woman with an uncanny knack for reading people, because she was too expensive and not data-driven. He replaced her with a slick young man from a business school whose algorithms couldn't predict the human heart. Key client, people I had vacationed with, whose children I had held as babies, began to feel neglected. They were handed off to junior account managers. They received automated holiday emails instead of my handwritten notes and personal phone calls. The culture of the company, a culture of fierce loyalty and shared purpose that I had nourished, began to sour. It became about metric, about quarterly growth at any cost. The soul was leaching out, and with it, the profits. I watched from my gilded cage as the first quarterly report under his full control was prepared. Charles brought me an advance copy. The numbers were down, slightly, but unmistakably. Customer satisfaction scores had plummeted. Employee turnover was up. Michael would spin it, of course. Transition costs, short-term adjustments for long-term gain. But the seed of doubt was planted. I closed the report and looked out at the garden. The roses were blooming beautifully. It was time to make my first, very gentle move. I picked up my personal phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "George," I said warmly when the gruff voice answered. "It's Eleanor. How's that grandson of yours? The Little League star?" We talked for 20 minutes about baseball and his bad knee. Only at the end did I say, lightly, "I heard you might be having some trouble with the new payment terms from Vance Solutions. A pity. You've always been the best. If you ever need an ear, or a suggestion for an alternative, you have my number. I'm just gardening these days, but I still hear things." I hung up. I hadn't asked him to do anything. I had merely reminded him I existed. I had reminded him of our history. I had watered a single, neglected root. It was a small thing, but in a desert, even a drop of water is noticed. The game was afoot. The seasons changed, and the leaves in my view of the garden turned fiery red and gold, then fell, leaving skeletal branches against a gray sky. It was a fitting backdrop. Inside the company I built, the chill was deepening. Michael's second quarter was worse than his first. The initial stumbles were no longer excusable as transition pains. They were a trend. The board, once so eager for youthful energy, was getting nervous. Charles reported whispered conversation, questions about strategic direction. Michael, feeling the pressure, doubled down. He launched a flashy, expensive new marketing campaign dreamed up by Chloe and her agency friends. It was all style, no substance, and it rang hollow to our core customer base, who valued reliability and quality. He started talking about pivoting, about disruptive technology, about leaving our stodgy past behind. He was alienating the very foundation the company stood upon. I continued my quiet campaign from the sidelines, a lunch here with a retired distributor, a sympathetic ear to a former executive who had been pushed out. I never spoke ill of Michael. I only ever expressed a grandmotherly concern, a hope that he would find his footing, and a nostalgic fondness for the old ways that seemed to work so well. I was a living memory, a ghost of success past, and my presence in the business community was a constant, gentle rebuke to his struggling reign. My phone calls and lunches were not overtly strategic. They were social, personal, but each conversation was a thread, and I was slowly, patiently reweaving a network of allegiance that existed entirely outside of the company's org charts. These people weren't loyal to Vance Solutions, the corporate entity. They were loyal to Eleanor, and they were talking to each other. The most critical pressure point, however, was financial. Michael, in his drive for rapid growth, had pursued a major new contract with a national retail chain. It was the kind of deal that could make his name. To secure it, he had to undercut our prices drastically and promise inventory levels that stretched our production to its absolute limit. He financed this gamble by reallocating capital from our research and development, our lifeblood for the future, and by stretching payments to our remaining loyal suppliers to the breaking point. He was betting the farm on one roll of the dice, and he didn't know what I knew. Thanks to the ledger, I knew the senior vice president at that retail chain was about to be ousted in a silent coup following a personal scandal. His replacement, a pragmatist with no attachment to Michael's deal, would likely review all pending contracts. I knew this because the replacement's former assistant was married to my former head of design, and over a bottle of wine years ago, certain industry gossip had been shared. This information was not in any corporate database. It was in the leather-bound book, under industry intelligence, unverified but reliable. I had to decide whether to use this knowledge, let him fall on his own, or give the wobbling table a slight nudge. I chose the nudge. I placed another call, this time to a journalist I had cultivated a relationship with decades ago, back when I was a novelty as a female CEO. We exchanged pleasantries. I mentioned, offhand, how fascinating it was to watch the generational shift in business, how my son was staking so much on the Bayview retail deal. I mused aloud about how volatile that particular company's executive suite had always been. Didn't she remember that scandal with the CFO 5 years back? Such a shame when personal lives disrupt business stability. I gave her nothing concrete, just an old woman's rambling thoughts. 2 weeks later, a well-sourced article appeared in a major business publication about turmoil in the upper ranks of Bayview retail, speculating on the future of its recent vendor agreement. The day it published, the stock price dipped. The board of Bayview went into emergency meetings. Michael's deal, which was days from final signature, was put under review indefinitely. I was in my garden office pretending to read a biography when Charles called. His voice was tight. "The Bayview deal is collapsing," he said. "Michael is in a panic. He's called an all-hands meeting. He's blaming the market, the media, everything but himself. The financials, Eleanor, he's overextended. If this deal dies, he will have to start laying people off just to meet payroll in 60 days. He's been so focused on the new, he's neglected the fundamentals. The cash flow is a nightmare." I felt a pang then, not of triumph, but of profound sadness. This was my life's work, and my son was driving it toward a cliff. The employees, the families that depended on us, they were innocent in this. "Thank you, Charles," I said quietly. "Let me know what happens." The layoffs came a month later, not a huge round, but enough to send a shockwave of fear through the company. The culture of loyalty I had built was now officially dead, replaced by a culture of fear and survival. Michael became more isolated, more paranoid, leaning harder on Chloe and a small inner circle who told him what he wanted to hear. He started looking for a scapegoat, and he began, finally, to look deeper into the mechanics of the business he had inherited. He started asking questions about old contract, about verbal agreement, about relationships that didn't make sense on the balance sheet. He was searching in the dark for something he couldn't name. He was looking for the ghost in the machine. He was looking for my ledger. He just didn't know it yet. One afternoon, Charles came to see me, his face more serious than usual. "He's been to see me," he said. "Michael, he was asking pointed questions about your personal files from the early years. He wanted to know if there were any private archives, any diaries, any non-digital records you might have kept separately from the company servers. He said he was trying to understand the historical context of some of the older partnerships." I almost smiled. "He's getting warmer. What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth," Charles said, spreading his hands, "that you were meticulous, that all official documents were archived according to law, that any personal notes you kept would be your private property and I wouldn't know their whereabouts." He didn't like that answer. He suspects something, Eleanor. He knows there's a piece missing. He can feel the shape of the hole in his understanding. Let him suspect, I said. The hunt will consume energy he doesn't have. The next move is his, and I knew what it would be. Frustrated in his search, feeling the walls closing in, he would come to me. Not as a son to a mother, but as a drowning man looking for a rope he had already cut. I waited. I tended to my actual garden on my apartment balcony. I reread my favorite novel. I lived the quiet life I was supposed to be living. And I prepared. When the call finally came, I was ready. It was Chloe's number that flashed on my screen, not Michael. That told me everything. Eleanor, she said, her voice saccharine sweet. We were wondering if you might be free for dinner this Friday. Michael has some things he'd love to pick your brain about. Some of these old-timer relationships are so confusing. We'd love your insight. Of course, dear, I said, my voice equally sweet. I'd be delighted. Tell Michael I'll bring my appetite and my memory. The stage was set for the next act. The restaurant they chose was all cold modern edges and loud acoustics, a place that valued being seen over conversation. It was Chloe's territory. I arrived precisely on time, wearing a simple navy dress and my emerald ring. I saw them before they saw me, seated at a prominent table in the center of the room. Michael looked tired, shadows under his eyes that no amount of good lighting could hide. Chloe was a vision of polished concern, her hand resting on his arm. She spotted me first, her smile flashing bright and false. Eleanor, you look wonderful, she said, air-kissing my cheek. So relaxed. Retirement clearly agrees with you. I smiled back, the picture of a contented grandmother. It has its moments, I said, taking the seat Michael held out for me. His eyes searched my face, looking for something, maybe guilt, maybe triumph. He found only pleasant calm. The small talk was excruciating. We discussed the weather, a new art exhibit Chloe was excited about, the traffic. The waiter took our drink orders. Finally, over appetizers, Michael could no longer contain the tension thrumming through him. He leaned forward, his voice dropping, trying to carve intimacy out of the noisy space. Mom, he began, then corrected himself. Eleanor, the business, we're facing some headwinds. I took a slow sip of my water. Oh? I said, feigning mild concern. That's a shame. The market has been volatile, hasn't it? It's not just the market, he said, frustration leaking into his tone. It's the people, the old partners. They're being obstinate. They don't respond to logic. They keep talking about the way things used to be, about handshake deals, about loyalty. It's maddening. He sounded like a man betrayed by a language he'd never bothered to learn. Chloe patted his hand. What Michael is trying to say, she interjected smoothly, is that we need your help. You have a rapport with these people. They trust you. If you could just talk to them, reassure them that our new direction is for the best, it would mean so much. She was offering me a role, the kindly old ambassador, using my remaining influence to clean up their mess. I set my fork down carefully. I looked at my son, really looked at him. I saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions, now lost inside this anxious, strained man. My heart ached for that boy, even as my mind remained clear about the man he'd become. Michael, I said gently, they trusted me because I never asked for their trust blindly. I earned it, transaction by transaction, year by year. They don't care about new direction. They care about being valued, about consistency. You can't send me in as a translator for a message they don't want to hear. His jaw tightened. Then, what do I do? The Bayview deal is dead. Cash flow is tight. I have a board meeting in 6 weeks, and I need to show a path forward. He was pleading now, the CEO veneer cracking to reveal the scared son beneath. For a moment, I was tempted to reach across the table, to tell him it would be all right, to fix it all for him as I had when he skinned his knees. But that would have been the end. He would have taken the solution and learned nothing, and Chloe would have whisked right back to his cliff's edge. I have to let him fall, I thought. He has to hit the ground. Only then will he look up. I don't have the answers, Michael, I said, my voice soft but firm. I'm not in the trenches anymore. You have all the data, all the analysts. You made the decision. You have to live with the consequences and find your own way out. The silence that fell at the table was so complete it seemed to swallow the restaurant noise. Chloe's smile had frozen into a grimace. Michael stared at me as if I'd slapped him. He had expected a lifeline, or at least a sympathetic ear. He had not expected this gentle, absolute refusal. "You built this company," he said, his voice low and accusatory. "You know where all the bodies are buried. There must be something, some leverage, some old agreement we can use. Tell me what you're not saying." Ah, there it was. The demand. The entitled son believing his mother's wisdom was his to inherit on command, not earned through experience. I met his gaze evenly. "I said everything that needed to be said when I handed over the keys, Michael. The rest is just noise and memory." The rest of the dinner was a formality. The food arrived, beautifully plated and tasteless. We ate in near silence, the chasm between us wider than the table. When the check came, Michael reached for it automatically, a hollow gesture of control. I insisted on paying for my own meal. I will not be a dependent, I thought. Not in any way. As we stood to leave, Chloe made one last attempt, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "It's such a shame you've chosen to be so distant, Eleanor. Families should stick together in times like these." I turned to her, my smile perfectly calibrated. "You're absolutely right, Chloe," I said. "Family should." And then, I turned and walked away, leaving them standing there. I didn't look back. The night air was cool and bracing. I took a deep breath, the weight of the encounter settling on my shoulders. It had been necessary, but it had cost me. Driving home, the city lights blurring past, I allowed myself to feel the full force of the sadness. This was not a victory. It was a tragedy playing out in slow motion. But I had committed to the course. The following weeks were a study in controlled collapse. Charles's reports grew more urgent. Michael, desperate and cornered, began making frantic moves. He tried to sell off a non-core division, but the offers were lowball, the buyers smelling blood in the water. He attempted to secure emergency financing, but the company's declining performance made the terms predatory. He fired his head of operation, a scapegoat for the production failures. Morale was in freefall. The whispers were now open conversation. People were polishing their resumes. The once proud Vance Solutions was becoming a cautionary tale. And through it all, Michael's obsession with finding my secret knowledge, my hidden key, grew into a mania. Charles told me he had hired a forensic accountant to go over decades of financial records, looking for anomalies, for off-book transactions. He had junior lawyers reviewing old contracts for hidden clauses. He was tearing the company apart looking for a ghost, blind to the fact that the real problem was walking the halls in his own shoes every day. He was looking for a magic file, not understanding that the magic had been a woman's lifetime of accumulated wisdom and relationships. He was sifting through ashes, looking for the spark, when he had been the one to pour water on the fire. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was stripped raw, all pretense gone. "Mom, I need you to come to the office. Now, please." It wasn't a request. It was a surrender. I told him I would be there in an hour. I took my time. I changed into a tailored pantsuit, a uniform of authority from a previous life. I applied a faint trace of lipstick. I looked at myself in the mirror, an elder stateswoman summoned to a crisis. I felt a terrifying clarity. This was the moment, the precipice. I called Charles. "It's time," I said simply. "Meet me there." The drive to the office building felt surreal. I hadn't entered the main lobby in months. The security guard, an old-timer named Ray, saw me and his eyes widened. "Mrs. Vance," he said, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Good to see you." "It's good to be seen, Ray," I said, and meant it. The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent. When the doors opened, the energy was palpably different. The hushed anxiety was like a fog. Assistants looked up, their expressions shifting from shock to something like hope. Word traveled ahead of me. "She's here." Michael's office door was closed. His assistant, a young woman I didn't recognize, looked terrified. "He's expecting you," she stammered. I didn't knock. I opened the door and walked in. He was standing at the window, his back to me, looking out at the rain streaking the glass. The office was a mess, papers everywhere, empty coffee cups. The room felt like the inside of a panicked mind. He turned. He looked decades older. His face was pale, his eyes hollow. He didn't speak. He just gestured weakly to a chair in front of his desk, the chair where partners, suitors, and now his mother would sit. I remained standing. "You asked for me," I said. He swallowed, the sound audible in the quiet room. "It's over," he said, the words barely a whisper. "The board is calling an emergency meeting tomorrow. They're going to vote me out. The lenders are threatening to call in their notes. We can't make payroll next month." He sank into his own chair, a deflating balloon. "I was so sure," he said, not to me, but to the ghost of his own ambition. "I was so sure I could do it better, cleaner, smarter." I waited. He finally looked up at me, and for the first time since he'd walked into my office to fire me, I saw my son. Not the CEO, not the rebel, just a lost, broken man. "Is there anything?" he asked, the last ember of hope. "Anything you can do? Anything you know that can stop this?" I held his gaze, my heart a battlefield of love and resolve. "There might be," I said slowly, "but you have to ask the right question, Michael. You have to stop looking for a file and start looking for the truth. You have to tell me what you really want." He stared at me, and the confusion in his eyes was so total it was almost childlike. He had asked for a solution, a trick, a secret key, and I had given him a riddle. "The right question?" he repeated, his voice ragged. "Mom, I don't have time for puzzles. The ship is sinking. I'm asking you for a lifeboat. Is there one or not?" I finally took the seat across from him, smoothing my pantsuit. The chair felt unfamiliar, a visitor's chair in my own kingdom. "This is not a puzzle, Michael," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "It is the only question that matters. What do you want? To save the company? To save your pride? Or to learn how to be the man who should be sitting in this chair?" He flinched, looking around the chaotic office as if seeing it for the first time. "I want to fix this," he said, a helpless anger rising in. "I don't want to be the one who destroyed everything you built." "That's a good sentiment," I said. "But it's about me. What do you want for you? Not as my son, not as the successor, as the man who made these choices. What is the lesson you need to learn from this fire?" He stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know," he burst out. "I don't know. I thought I knew. I thought it was about modernizing, about efficiency, about not being stuck in the past. But nothing worked. The numbers lied. The people left. The deals fell apart. Everything I touched turned to dust." He stopped, his shoulders slumping. "And you just watched. You knew it would happen. You sat in your garden office, and you watched me fail." There was no accusation left in the statement, only a bleak realization. "Yes," I said softly. "I did. Because sometimes, Michael, the only way to learn that fire burns is to touch the flame. You had to see for yourself that what you dismissed as the past was actually the foundation. You had to feel the structure shake to understand what was holding it up." He sank back into his chair, the fight gone out of him. "So it's over. There's no lifeboat." "There might be," I said, "but it doesn't look like a lifeboat. It looks like a long, hard swim to shore. And you have to ask for it. You have to ask me for the truth." He was silent for a long time, the only sound the patter of rain against the glass. I watched him wrestle with it, his pride, his shame, his desperation. Finally, he looked up, his eyes clear for the first time that evening. "Tell me," he said. "Tell me what I don't know. Tell me what you know that I don't. Tell me the truth about this company." That was it. Not a demand for a file, but a request for understanding. It was the right question. I nodded once. "Charles is on his way," I said. "And he has the answer." 10 minutes later, Charles entered, carrying the worn leather satchel. He gave me a slight, confirming nod, then placed the satchel on Michael's desk. Michael stared at it as if it were a sleeping animal. "What is that?" he asked. "This," I said, "is what you've been tearing the building apart looking for. It is not a secret bank account. It is not a magic contract. It is my ledger." Charles opened the satchel and withdrew the book. It was thick, bound in brown leather worn soft with age, the pages edged in gold leaf that had dulled. He placed it in front of Michael. Michael reached out, touched the cover with a kind of reverence, then opened it. He flipped a few pages, his eyes scanning my tight, familiar handwriting. He saw names, dates, amounts, Notes. He saw notations like promised him first refusal on the Midwest expansion, handshake, 1998 and her son needed the internship, we placed him, loyalty secured and vulnerability, divorce settlement pending, keep terms flexible for now. He saw real estate deals that were never officially recorded, partnerships based on personal debts of honor, the true reasons behind decades of decision. This is everything, he whispered, awe and horror mixing in his voice. This is the real company. All the official records, they're just, yes, I said. They are just the shadow. This is the substance. The soul of the business is not in the profit and loss statement. It is in these pages. It is in the memory of who helped whom, who owes whom, who trusts whom. You tried to run the shadow. The substance fought back. He kept turning pages slowly, absorbing the magnitude of what he held. I should have had this, he said, but it wasn't an accusation anymore. It was a regret. You couldn't have it, Michael, I said, not unkindly. You wouldn't have known what to do with it. This isn't a manual. It's a history. It's a record of judgments made in real time by a person in a specific context. You would have tried to systematize it, to leverage it bluntly, and you would have destroyed the very trust it represents. You had to earn the right to understand it by first understanding its value, by failing without it. He closed the book gently, his hand resting on the cover. So what now? He asked, looking from me to Charles. The board meets tomorrow. The ledger doesn't pay our bills. Now, I said, we see if you've learned anything. You have the truth in your hands. The question is, can you use it not as a weapon, but as a bridge? Charles spoke then. The immediate problem is payroll and the lender notes. There are 3 entities in that book who owe your mother favors of such magnitude that, if called, they would provide bridge financing on favorable terms based on her word alone. There are 2 key suppliers whose personal loyalty, documented there, would agree to extended payment terms immediately if asked by her. That solves the 60-day crisis. It gives you breathing room. Michael's eyes widened. You can do that? They will still listen to you? They will listen to me, I confirmed, but they will do it for me, Michael. Not for you. Not yet. If I make these calls, I am back in the business. Not in a garden office. Not as an advisor. I am in the center again. And you will be at my side, not as the CEO, but as the apprentice you should have been from the beginning. You will learn, from the ground up, what these numbers in this book really mean. You will meet these people, you will look them in the eye, and you will understand that a business is a web of human being, not a spreadsheet. He didn't hesitate. He was too far gone for pride. Yes, he said, whatever it takes. Please, make the calls. I looked at Charles. Let's begin. What happened next was a blur of quiet, powerful telephony. Charles and I used the speakerphone on Michael's desk. I called George first. George, it's Eleanor. I need to call in that favor from the warehouse fire. I need a short-term loan, personally guaranteed by me. The terms are in the old ledger. He didn't ask for a document. He said, how much do you need, Ellie? I gave him the number. He said, the wires will cross in the morning. I called Susan, whose husband I had stood by during his illness. Susan, I need you to extend our terms to net 90. I know it's a lot. I'll explain over lunch next week. She said, for you, Eleanor, of course. Just have your boys stop sending us those nasty automated payment reminders. Michael flushed, staring at his hand. Call by call, we stabilized the immediate bleeding. It took an hour. It was the most efficient hour of business I had ever conducted. When the last call ended, the atmosphere in the room had changed. The impending doom had lifted, replaced by a fragile, stunned hope. Michael looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. The power he had thought was in the title, in the corner office, had just been demonstrated to him. It had been in the woman all along. He stood up, came around the desk, and he did something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. He knelt beside my chair. He put his head in his hands, and his shoulders began to shake. I'm so sorry, Mom, he choked out, the words muffled. I was arrogant. I was blind. I thought you were just old. I thought I was saving the company from you. I was saving it from myself. I placed my hand on his head, feeling the familiar texture of his hair. My own eyes burned. I knew this moment would hurt. I knew it would be the hardest part. I forgive you, Michael, I whispered. You are my son. But forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. Starting tomorrow, You have a lot of work to do. You have to win back the trust of everyone in this building. You have to earn the right to have your name in a ledger like that." He looked up, his face streaked with tears. "I will. I'll do whatever it takes." "I believe you will," I said. "Now, go home. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, the real work begins, for all of us." He left, a man walking out of a storm into an uncertain calm. Charles and I were alone. He packed the ledger back into its satchel. "You played a long game, Eleanor," he said, his voice full of admiration and exhaustion. "I did what a mother and a founder had to do," I said, standing up, my knees protesting. "I saved my son, and in doing so, I hope I saved my company. Now, let's go home. It's been a long day." The next morning, I arrived at the office at 7, an hour before the usual bustle. I went not to the garden suite, but to my old office, the one with the view. The cleaning staff had been in. It was tidy, impersonal, a museum of my absence. Michael's things were already gone. He had moved them back to his old vice president's office in the night, a silent, powerful statement. I stood at the window, watching the city wake up. The storm had passed, literally and figuratively, leaving a washed clean sky. I felt a profound exhaustion in my bones, the kind that comes from an emotional marathon, but beneath it was a current of steady purpose. I was back, not as a triumphant queen reclaiming her throne, but as a surgeon returning to a critical patient. At 8:15, Charles arrived with a stack of papers and 2 cups of strong coffee. He handed one to me. "The board," he said without preamble, "is confused but compliant." I shared a high-level summary of the interim financing and the supplier agreement. "They've postponed the vote to remove Michael, contingent on a new 30-day stabilization plan from you. They're nervous, but they remember what you can do." "Good," I said, taking a grateful sip. "And Michael?" "He's in his office," Charles said, a hint of a smile on his lips. "He looks like he hasn't slept, but he's waiting for you. He knows today is the first day of school." I found Michael at his desk, but he wasn't sitting in the chair. He was standing beside it, as if he no longer felt entitled to it. He was dressed more simply, no flashy tie, just a plain white shirt. He looked young and terribly serious. "Mom," he said, "where do we start?" "We start with a walk," I said. I led him out of the executive suite, past the curious stares of the early arrivals. We took the elevator down to the main production floor. The hum and clatter of machinery was a sound I realized I'd deeply missed. It was the sound of things being made. I walked him to the line where our flagship product was assembled. I introduced him to Maria, a line supervisor who had been with us for 22 years. "Michael, this is Maria. Her team has the lowest error rate and the highest output 3 years running. She also personally mentors every new hire on this floor. Maria, I'd like you to meet my son Michael. He's going to be spending some time learning the business from the ground up." Maria wiped her hands on her smock, her eyes shrewd and kind. She shook his hand. "A pleasure," she said. "Your mother used to walk this floor every Friday, rain or shine, knew all our names, knew our kids' names too. We've missed that." Michael nodded, a flush creeping up his neck. "I'd like to learn," he said, his voice earnest. "Maybe you could show me what you look for in a quality check?" Maria's face softened. "I'd be happy to." We spent the morning there. I watched Michael, not as a CEO, but as a student. He asked questions. He listened. He got his hands dirty. He didn't talk about efficiencies or metrics. He asked about the feel of a proper seal, the sound of a correctly tuned machine. The workers, initially wary, began to respond to his genuine curiosity. It was a small start, but it was the only start that mattered. In the afternoon, we returned upstairs, but not to hold court. We sat in a small conference room with a list. "This," I said, pushing the paper toward him, "is the apology tour. It's every key client you handed off to junior staff, every partner you tried to strong-arm on pricing. We are going to call every single one, together. You will listen to me, and then you will speak." The first call was the hardest. I dialed, put it on speaker. "Harold, it's Eleanor Vance. I'm here with my son Michael. We're calling because we owe you an apology." Harold, a gruff man who distributed our products across 3 states, was silent for a beat. "Eleanor," he finally said, "I heard you were out to pasture." I'm back in the barn, Harold, I said lightly, and the first order of business is making things right. My son made a decision regarding your account that reflected a lack of understanding of our history. He's here to explain. I nodded to Michael. His throat was tight. Mr. Henderson, Michael began, his voice formal at first, then softening. I was wrong. I treated our partnership as a transaction when it was always a relationship. I am deeply sorry for the disrespect. I am reinstating your previous terms immediately, and I hope, in time, you'll allow me to rebuild your trust. There was another pause. I appreciate that, Michael, Harold said, his tone thawing. But I'll be honest, I'm doing this for your mother. You'll have to prove it to me yourself. That is all I ask for, sir, Michael said. The chance to prove it. We made 12 calls that afternoon. Each one was a lesson in humility, in the weight of a spoken word, in the fact that loyalty is not a corporate buzzword, but a fragile, living thing you have to feed and water. Michael's apologies grew more natural, more heartfelt. He wasn't reading a script by the end. He was speaking from a place of hard-won understanding. In between calls, we talked, really talked. He told me about the pressure he'd felt, the whispering from Chloe and her circle that he needed to be harder, smarter, more ruthless to fill my shoes. He admitted he'd been intimidated by my legacy, so he'd tried to bury it instead of build on it. I told him stories I'd never shared before, stories of my own catastrophic failures in the early days, the deals that fell through, the times I'd nearly lost everything. I told him how Charles had mortgaged his own house to cover payroll once, how real trust is forged in those moments of shared risk, not in quarterly reports. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in 20 years. By 5 o'clock, we were both drained. The office was quieting down. I looked at my son, saw the new lines of fatigue and thought on his face, and I also saw a clarity that had been missing. You did good work today, I said. Thank you, he said. He looked down at his hands. About Chloe. She's not happy. She thinks I'm capitulating. She doesn't understand why I'm not fighting you for control. What do you think, Michael? I asked. He met my gaze. I think I spent years fighting for the wrong kind of control, the kind that looks powerful but is hollow. I'm tired of fighting you. I'd rather learn from you. The simplicity of his statement struck me. It was the reconciliation I had hoped for but hadn't dared to believe would come. The business can be rebuilt, I said. Some relationships are harder. You'll have to decide what matters most to you. I know, he said quietly. I need to go home and have a very difficult conversation. He stood to leave, then turned back. The ledger, he said. Will you ever let me contribute to it? I smiled, a real warm smile that reached my eyes. When you've earned your first entry, Michael. Not before. And I'll know when that day comes. He nodded, accepting the challenge. He left, and I was alone in the quiet conference room. The sunset was painting the sky in oranges and purples outside the window. I felt a deep, settling peace. The crisis was not over. There were months, maybe years, of hard work ahead to restore the company's financial health and its spirit. But the foundation had been repaired today. Not with money or contract, but with humility and a handful of genuine apologies. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Charles. The wires from George cleared. Payroll is secure. I typed a reply. Thank you, old friend. Then I sat for a long while, watching the day end. I wasn't thinking about strategies or ledgers. I was thinking about my son as a little boy, building towers with blocks. He would build them so high, and they would always eventually tumble. He would cry in frustration, and I would sit with him and say, let's look at the base. The base has to be strong. And we would start again, together. We were starting again. The tower had tumbled, but we were both still here, sitting on the floor, ready to rebuild. This time, we would build it right. The next 30 days passed in a relentless, focused rhythm that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. It was like relearning a favorite piece of music on the piano, the muscle memory returning note by note. Michael and I fell into a routine. He would arrive at my office, now my office again, at 8 each morning, with 2 fresh coffees. We would review the day's priorities, There were no more boardroom presentations with slick graphics. Our meetings were in warehouses, on factory floors, in the modest offices of suppliers who were slowly beginning to believe the change was real. I let Michael take the lead in these meetings, but I was always there, a steady presence in the chair beside him. I watched him learn to listen more than he spoke. I watched him struggle to explain to the design team why we were shelving Chloe's expensive, flashy rebranding to focus on the core product messaging that had built our reputation. He didn't fire the slick marketing head, but he moved him to a special projects role, a diplomatic demotion that spoke of a new kind of wisdom. It was messy, incremental work. There were setbacks. A key client we'd apologized to decided to take half their business elsewhere anyway, a casualty of the broken trust that couldn't be mended with one phone call. Michael took the news hard, seeing it as a personal failure. "It's not a verdict on you," I told him as we pored over the loss projection. "It's a bill come due for past mistakes. We pay it, we learn, and we move forward. This is the weight of leadership. It's heavier than you thought, isn't it?" He just nodded, his jaw set, and went back to the numbers. Chloe's presence was a cold silence at the edge of our efforts. She resigned from her nominal role at the company a week into the new regime, a move that was both a protest and a relief. Michael moved out of their shared apartment temporarily into a corporate suite. He said they needed space. The few times I saw him after he'd spoken with her, his eyes had a distant, pained look. He was mourning, I realized, not just a marriage perhaps, but a version of himself she had reflected back at him, the one who was going to conquer the world without any messy history. He was letting that man go, and it was a painful birth. My role evolved daily. I was part CEO, part coach, part mother. Some days I was deep in the financials with Charles, restructuring debt, finding every ounce of fat to trim. Other days I was simply a listener as Michael processed the lessons he was learning. One afternoon, he came into my office, looking puzzled. "I just got off the phone with Susan at Acme Supply," he said. "She agreed to the net 90 terms. But then she spent 10 minutes asking about my daughter's soccer tournament. She remembered I mentioned it months ago. Why does that matter?" "Because it's the whole game, Michael," I said, leaning back in my chair. "She's not just selling you parts. She's investing in you, in your family, in the person behind the title. The terms are the business. Asking about the soccer game is the relationship. The relationship is what gets you net 90 when no one else would." The light in his eyes was the light of understanding, brighter than any quarterly profit spike. He was starting to see the tapestry, not just the threads. After 4 weeks, Charles and I presented the 30-day stabilization report to the board. The numbers were still bleak in many ways. We were not profitable, but the freefall had stopped. The line on the graph had flattened, and at the very end, there was the slightest, most tentative upward tick. More importantly, the narrative had changed. I spoke about restored supplier relationships, about employee retention improving, about a return to our quality ethos. Michael spoke, not with bravado, but with a grounded assessment of our challenges and a humble request for more time. The board voted unanimously to keep him as CEO, with the condition that I remain as executive chair, actively engaged. It was the structure we should have had from the beginning. As we left the boardroom, Michael let out a long, slow breath. "I feel like I just passed the first real test of my life," he said. "The first of many," I replied, squeezing his arm. "But you passed." That evening, he came to my apartment for dinner, just the two of us. I cooked something simple, a pasta dish his father had loved. We ate at the small table by the window, the city lights twinkling below. The conversation was easy, drifting from shop talk to memories of his father, to his daughter's latest obsession with astronomy. It felt normal, an ordinary meal between a mother and her son, and the sheer ordinariness of it was extraordinary to me. After we cleaned up, he lingered by the door. "Mom," he said, his voice thick, "thank you for not giving up on me." "I didn't give up on you," I said, reaching up to cup his face. "I just had to wait for you to come back to yourself." He hugged me then, a long, tight hug that held years of pride and distance and regret. When he pulled away, his eyes were bright. "I'll see you tomorrow," he said, bright and early. After he left, I felt the silence of the apartment settle around me. It was a good silence, a peaceful one. I walked to my study, to the small, locked filing cabinet in the corner. I used a key I kept on my personal keyring, not the one for the office. Inside, behind mundane household files, was the ledger. I took it out, its weight of comfort in my hands. I brought it to my desk and opened it to a fresh page near the back. I picked up my favorite fountain pen, the one my husband had given me for our 10th anniversary. I dated the entry at the top. Then, I began to write. Today, my son earned his first entry. He listened more than he spoke. He valued a person over a metric. He chose humility over pride. He accepted the weight of his mistakes and began the long work of carrying them. He is rebuilding, not on a new foundation, but on the old, true one he once tried to bury. He is becoming a steward. I paused, the ink glistening under the lamplight. Then I added one final line. I am proud of the man he is choosing to become. I closed the book, ran my fingers over the embossed leather. This was the only entry that had ever brought me tears. They were quiet tears, not of sadness, but of a completion I had hardly dared to hope for. The secret was no longer just a record of debts and loyalty. It was now also a record of redemption. I put the ledger away, locking the cabinet. The story wasn't over. There would be new challenges, new entries to make, but a crucial chapter had ended and a better one had begun. I turned off the light in the study and went to bed, thinking not of business, but of family and of the fragile, miraculous fact that it is never too late to rebuild. The foundation, if it is honest and strong, can always bear the weight of a new beginning. The seasons turned, and our recovery became a rhythm. It was not a dramatic resurgence, but a slow and steady healing, like a patient learning to walk again after a long illness. Michael and I settled into a partnership that felt natural, a true collaboration where my experience tempered his energy and his fresh perspective sometimes showed me a more efficient path. We disagreed, of course, but the disagreements were now about methods, not about the soul of the company. That was something we protected together, a sacred trust. I began to step back, in small, deliberate ways. I stopped attending every supplier meeting. I let him handle the board updates alone. My office hours grew shorter, and I took long lunches with old friends I had neglected for years. It was a conscious transfer of the mantle, but this time it was being handed, not taken. One Tuesday in early spring, Michael came into my office looking uncharacteristically nervous. He was holding a simple folder. "Mom," he said, "I need to run something by you. It's a proposal, not a corporate one, a personal one." He laid the folder on my desk. I opened it. Inside were divorce papers. The filing was amicable, the terms straightforward. He had given Chloe the apartment, a settlement she had agreed to, and they shared custody of their daughter, my granddaughter Lily. I looked up at him. His face was calm, but his eyes held the residue of a deep sadness. "I'm sorry," I said, because it was the truth. I was sorry for his pain, for the failure of a dream, even if that dream had been built on a shaky foundation. "Don't be," he said, sitting down. It was the final piece of the old life that needed to fall away. We wanted different things. She wanted the symbol of success. I'm learning to want the substance. It's quieter. It's harder. But it's real. He tapped the folder. This is me taking responsibility for my choices, all the way to the end. I closed the folder and pushed it back to him. "You have my support, in whatever way you need it," I said. "And you have Lily. That is the most important partnership you will ever have." He nodded, a softness coming over his face when he spoke of his daughter. "She's asking about the factory, wants to know how things are made. Maybe you could bring her by sometime, show her your old office." "I would love nothing more," I said, and my heart swelled at the thought. A few days later, I did just that. Lily, a bright-eyed 8-year-old with her father's curiosity, held my hand as we walked the production floor. I showed her the machines, introduced her to Maria, who beamed and showed her how to spot a perfect finish on a product. "This is where your grandfather and I started," I told her, pointing to a framed photograph on the wall of a much younger me in a hard hat, standing in what was then an empty, dusty space. "We built it from an idea." Lily looked up at me, her head tilted. "Daddy says you saved the company. Did you fight a dragon?" I laughed. the sound echoing in the vast room. "In a way, sweetheart," I said. "But the dragon was just confusion. And we didn't fight it, we reminded it of its true name." She didn't understand, but she smiled and squeezed my hand. That afternoon, Michael joined us in my office. Lily was drawing pictures at the small conference table. He watched her for a moment, then turned to me. "I've been thinking about the ledger," he said. "Not about seeing it, about what it represents. I want to start one, not a secret one, an open one, a record of the new promises we make, the real reasons behind our decisions, the human stuff that never makes it into the official minutes, so we never forget again." I looked at him, this man who had journeyed so far from the arrogant stranger who had fired me, and I felt a pride so profound it stole my breath. "That, Michael, is a magnificent idea," I said. "You should. And you should share it with your leadership team. Teach them the language." He grinned, a real, easy grin. "I think I will." A week later, he did just that. He gathered his department heads, the new team he had built based on competence and character, not just connection. He didn't bring out my leather-bound book. He brought out a simple, elegant journal. He told them the story of its concept, of the invisible architecture of trust that holds a business together. He called it the Company Chronicle. Participation was voluntary, but he would lead by example. I watched from the back of the room, unseen. I saw the skeptical looks turn to thoughtful ones. I saw a young operations manager nod slowly, as if a puzzle piece had clicked into place. He was building a culture, not imposing one. That was the moment I knew my work was truly done. Later that evening, Charles came over for a drink. We sat on my balcony, the evening air cool and sweet. "To a crisis averted," he said, raising his glass. "To a future secured," I replied. We clinked glasses. He looked at me carefully. "You're planning your exit," he observed. "Not an exit," I said. "A transition. A graceful one this time. The company doesn't need me in the office every day. It needs me as a compass, not a captain. Michael is the captain now." "I believe that," he said. "He's a different man. You're a different woman too. You know. Lighter." I felt it. The constant low-grade hum of vigilance that had been my background noise for decades was finally quieting. I was sleeping through the night. I was reading novels again, not just business journals. I was, for the first time in a very long time, just Eleanor. A few months later, I officially stepped down from the executive chair role. The board gave me the title of founder and chair emeritus. It was ceremonial, and that was perfect. Michael threw a party for me, not in a stuffy hotel ballroom, but right in the main factory space. They had cleared an area, strung up lights, and the whole company was there, from the newest mailroom clerk to the most senior engineer. Maria gave a speech that made me cry. Michael's speech was simple. He talked about learning that strength isn't about how hard you push, but how well you listen. He talked about legacy not as a monument, but as a living, growing thing you pass on like a baton, not a crown. Then, he called me up. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the high ceiling. I looked out at the sea of faces, people whose lives were intertwined with this place I had built. I didn't talk about profit margins or market share. I talked about the first time I walked onto that empty floor, pregnant with Michael, full of equal parts terror and hope. I talked about the people who had believed in that hope. I told them the company's greatest asset was not its inventory or its patent, but the shared belief in doing good work, together. I held up my glass. "To the foundation," I said, "may it always be strong." The cheer that followed was the sound of a family, not just a workforce. I caught Michael's eye across the crowd. He smiled, and in that smile was a lifetime of understanding, hard-won and precious. I went home that night filled with a quiet joy. The next morning, I slept in. When I finally rose, I made coffee and took it to my study. I unlocked the filing cabinet. I took out the ledger. I carried it to the living room where the morning sun was streaming in. I sat in my favorite armchair and I opened it, not to any specific page, but simply to feel the weight of its history in my lap. I had spent a lifetime filling these pages. Now it was someone else's turn to write. I closed the book for what I knew would be the last time as its active keeper. I would put it away, a relic of a past battle. Its lessons, however, were no longer secret. They were alive in the heart of my son, in the new journal on his desk, in the culture of a company that had remembered its soul. The secret was out, and in being shared, it had finally fulfilled its purpose. It was no longer a weapon of defense, but a gift of wisdom. My story, the story of the ledger, was over, but the story of the company, and of my family, was just beginning its best chapter. I placed the book on the side table and picked up my coffee, looking out at the new day, ready for whatever quiet adventure came next. The first few months of my official retirement were a strange symphony of silence and memory. I had spent over 50 years with the sound of business in my ears, the constant ring of phones, the murmur of meetings, the decisive click of my own heels on polished floors. Now the loudest sound was the percolator of my coffee maker in the morning. I had to learn how to be still. It was harder than any negotiation I had ever faced. Michael would call every day at first, sometimes with a question, sometimes just to talk. I listened, I offered perspective when asked, but I was careful not to reach for the reins. He needed to feel the weight of the decisions alone, to build his own confidence without my shadow over his shoulder. It was an act of love, letting go. One Thursday, he called, his voice buzzing with an energy I hadn't heard in years. "Mom, you have to come down here. Right now. Don't argue, just come." There was joy in his command. Curiosity got the better of me. I drove downtown, parked in my old spot which still had my name on it, a sentimental gesture Michael had refused to remove. The lobby felt different, brighter, somehow. There were new faces at the reception desk, but they smiled and waved me toward the elevator, expecting me. When the doors opened on the executive floor, I heard it before I saw it. Laughter. Real, unguarded laughter coming from the main conference room. I walked to the open door. The room was full of people, many of them from the factory floor, mixed in with the designers and the sales team. There were pizzas and salads spread out on the table. In the center of it all was Michael, holding a large, beautifully bound book. He saw me, and his face lit up. "You made it," he said, and the room quieted, all eyes turning to me with warmth. "We were just having a working lunch," he explained, gesturing with the book, "and we were making an entry. I want you to see the first one." He brought the book over to me. It was the Company Chronicle. The leather was new and smooth, but the intent was ancient. He opened it to the first page. The handwriting was his, but steadier, more assured than I remembered. "Today we made a decision with our hearts, not just our heads. The Jenkins account, a small but loyal client for 15 years, is facing hardship. The easy call was to enforce our terms. Instead, we met as a team. Maria from production suggested we could modify their order to reduce their costs without sacrificing our margin. David from sales proposed a flexible payment plan. We voted. The decision was unanimous. We choose the long road, the human road. We choose to be the kind of company that remembers." Signed, Michael Vance, with thanks to the team. Below his signature were other signatures, Maria's, David's, a dozen more, a choir of agreement. I ran my finger over the dry ink, my throat tight. It was more beautiful than any entry in my old ledger. "This is what I wanted to show you," Michael said softly, for my ears only. "The first entry, the foundation of the new house. You built the cellar, Mom. We're building the living room, and we're doing it together." I could only nod, swallowing against the emotion. The room had gone back to its easy chatter. I saw the way people looked at Michael, not with fear or cautious obedience, but with respect and a kind of collaborative pride. He had not just taken over a company, he had nurtured a community. I stayed for a slice of pizza, for the sheer pleasure of listening to the human symphony of a business thriving in a way I had always dreamed of but had been too busy fighting fires to fully cultivate. Before I left, Michael walked me to the elevator. He seemed taller to me, not in stature, but in presence. "I'm proud of you," I said, the words feeling utterly insufficient. He hugged me. I learned from the best. A few weeks later, my granddaughter Lily came for a weekend sleepover. We built a fort in the living room with blankets and pillows. We baked cookies and made a terrible mess. On Sunday morning, over pancakes, she looked at me with her serious eyes. "Grandma, were you really the boss of everything?" I laughed. For a long time, yes, I was. But you know what? Being the boss of everything isn't as fun as being the boss of this pancake batter. Getting it just right, that's the important thing. She thought about this, syrup dripping from her fork. Daddy says you know all the secrets. I do know some, I conceded, but the best secret is that there are no real secrets, only things people forget to pay attention to, like listening, and being kind, and measuring your flour properly. She giggled. That's not a secret, that's just being good. Exactly, I said, wiping a smudge of batter from her cheek. Exactly. After Michael picked her up, the apartment felt especially quiet again, but the silence was no longer unfamiliar. It was peaceful. I realized I was not lonely. I was connected in a deeper, more enduring way. I was part of the story, not the author of every page. One afternoon, Charles came by. He had officially retired too, though he still did the occasional legal consult for Michael, mostly for the pleasure of it. We sat on the balcony, as had become our habit. He handed me a small, gift-wrapped box. A little something, he said, for the archives. I opened it. Inside was a beautiful brass keychain. On it was a single old-fashioned key. It was not a key to anything. It was symbolic. To the ledger, he said with a smile, may it forever remain locked, because its lessons are finally free. I held the cool, heavy brass in my palm. It was perfect. Thank you, Charles, I said, for everything, for being the keeper of the secrets with me. He waved a hand. It was the privilege of my career, Eleanor. Watching you build, watching you fight, watching you mend. It was better than any courtroom drama. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the clouds drift. I thought about the keychain, about the ledger locked away in my filing cabinet. I thought about Michael's open book in the sunny conference room. The past was safe. The future was alive and growing. There was nothing more to protect, only things to cherish. That night, I dreamt of my husband. It was a good dream, not sad. We were walking through the empty factory space from the old photograph, but it was full of light. He didn't say anything, just smiled and pointed toward the office. When I woke, the first rays of sun were coming through my window. I felt a sense of completion so profound it was like a physical warmth in my chest. The work was done. My work. The mother's work and the founder's work had at last become the same thing. They had converged into a single, quiet point of satisfaction. I got up, made my coffee, and did something I hadn't done in years. I called a friend and made plans for a long, leisurely lunch with no agenda. I went to a museum and got lost in the art. I signed up for a lecture series on ancient history, something that had nothing to do with business at all. I was filling my days, not with tasks, but with life. The company, my beautiful, complicated child of a company, was in good hands. It was more than a balance sheet. It was a living testament to the idea that people matter more than profit, that integrity is a business model, and that sometimes you have to nearly lose everything to understand what you truly have. My phone buzzed. It was a photo from Michael, a picture of the company chronicle, open on his desk. The new entry was just one line, in his handwriting. Remember to look up from the numbers. The sky is particularly blue today. I smiled and typed my reply. It certainly is. Has a way of softening the edges of even the sharpest memory. A year passed, then two. My life settled into a new, gentle pattern. I became a familiar face at the botanical gardens, a volunteer at the local library where I read to children on Thursday afternoon. I found a strange and wonderful freedom in being nobody's boss, in being simply Eleanor. The company thrived under Michael's stewardship. It didn't become a flashy empire, and that was the point. It became respected, solid, and truly profitable in a sustainable way. He had found his own rhythm, one that balanced the heart of the old ways with the sensible efficiencies of the new. He started a small foundation in his father's name, funding vocational training, a quiet nod to the hands that build things. I would visit the office occasionally, maybe once a month, always unannounced. I loved to see the changes. The garden office was now a meditation and nursing room for employees. My old office was still Michael's, but he had kept my ancient, scarred desk, a talisman of history. The place buzzed with a calm, purposeful energy. People looked me in the eye and smiled. They weren't afraid of me anymore. They saw a founder, a grandmother, not a threat. One crisp autumn afternoon, I was there dropping off some old photos I'd found for the company archive. Michael was in a meeting, so I wandered. I found myself on the production floor. Maria saw me and waved me over. She was training a new group of hires, her voice patient and clear. When she finished her demonstration, she came to me, wiping her hands on a cloth. "Eleanor," she said, her eyes crinkling, "you're just in time. We're about to do the thing." "The thing?" I asked. She led me to a clear space on the wall, near the line where the finished products came off. There was a simple frame there, but it was empty. The team Michael had assembled, the one that signed the first Chronicle entry, gathered around. Michael appeared too, slipping out of his meeting. He had a piece of paper in his hand. "We decided," he announced to the group, "that the first entry in the company chronicle shouldn't just live in a book in my office. It should be here, where the work happens. So we're putting it on the wall. A reminder for everyone." He carefully placed the paper in the frame, a typeset version of that first handwritten entry about the Jenkins account. Below the text were all the signatures. "Reproduce." He sealed the back and hung it on the wall. A small, spontaneous round of applause broke out. It wasn't for him, or for the entry. It was for the idea, for the choice they had all made together, now made permanent. I felt the tears then, warm and unashamed. This was the legacy, not a name on a building, but a principle embedded in a wall. Michael put his arm around my shoulder. "This is your doing, you know," he whispered. I shook my head. "No, this is yours. You understood the assignment." Later, back in his office, he made us tea. We sat by the window. He was quiet for a while, stirring his cup. "I'm seeing someone," he said finally. "Her name is Claire. She's a teacher. She has no idea what EBITDA stands for, and she thinks that's hilarious." He looked up, a little nervous. "I wanted you to know." I reached across and took his hand. "Tell me about her," I said. And he did. He talked about her kindness, her curiosity, how she asked him about his day, and actually listened to the answer about people and problems, not just numbers. He talked about how she was with Lily, how they built ridiculous Lego castles together. He talked like a man who had found a harbor after a long, stormy voyage. "I am so happy for you," I said, and I meant it with every fiber of my being. It was the final piece, the proof that he had built a life separate from the shadow of the company, separate from the ghost of his past mistakes. He was whole. That winter, I decided to take a trip, not a business trip, a real one. I went to the coast, to a small cottage where the only sound was the crash of waves. I brought a stack of novels and my own thoughts. I did something there I had been putting off for years. I began to write, not a memoir, not a business guide, just my story, the real one, with all the fears and doubts and triumphs left in. I wrote about the early days of terror and hope. I wrote about the loneliness of leadership. I wrote about the day my husband died and how the company became both my refuge and my prison. I wrote about the heartbreak of my son's betrayal and the agonizing patience of his redemption. I wrote it all down in a simple notebook, purging it from my heart onto the page. It was the final ledger, the one just for me. One evening, sitting by the fire in the cottage, I read a passage I had written about the day Michael fired me. I had described the sunlight on my desk, the cold feeling in my stomach, the absolute certainty that I would fight back. I realized then that I was no longer angry, no longer hurt. I was grateful. That terrible day was the catalyst for everything good that followed. It broke us open, so we could be put back together, stronger. I closed the notebook. I didn't need it anymore. The past was finally just a story, not a weight. I returned home as the first buds were appearing on the trees. Life went on in its gentle way. I had dinner with Michael and Claire and Lily, the laughter around the table a music more precious than any deal I ever closed. I had coffee with Charles, where we talked about books and travel and rarely mentioned the law. I grew tomatoes on my balcony, and I killed a good many of them, learning as I went. Then, on a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning, the phone rang. It was Michael. His voice was calm, but I heard the profound gravity in it. "Mom," he said, "we're ready. We'd like you to come to the board meeting today. As a guest, there's something we want to show you." I dressed with care, a sense of quiet ceremony in the action. The boardroom was full when I entered. The directors, many of them new faces, stood as I came in. The respect in the room was a tangible thing. Michael sat at the head of the table. He gestured to the seat beside him, reserved for me. "Thank you for coming," he said to the room, but his eyes were on me. "We've reached a milestone. 2 years of sustained growth, not just financially, but in culture, in employee satisfaction, in client loyalty. The foundations we rebuilt are solid." He took a deep breath. "And so, it's time. I'm proposing a new position be created. The role of founder and chair emeritus has been largely ceremonial. I propose we make it active again, but with a new focus. I want to create the Vance Stewardship Council, a small group led by Eleanor that meets quarterly. Their sole mandate is not to review financial, but to review the soul of the company, to read the company chronicle, to interview employees at random, to ensure that the principles that saved us are never again forgotten, that they are woven into the na of this organization forever." He turned to me. "Mom, will you lead it? Will you be our North Star, not for the day-to-day, but for the forever?" The room was utterly still. I looked at my son, at the man of integrity he had forged himself into. I looked at the board, their faces nodding in unanimous agreement. This was not a plot to push me out. This was an invitation to cement my deepest values into the future. It was the ultimate honor. "Yes," I said, my voice strong and clear in the quiet room. I would be honored. The vote was a formality. It passed without a single nay. After the meeting, as people filed out, Michael and I were left alone. He looked at me, a boyish hope in his eyes. "Was that okay?" "It was more than okay," I said. "It's perfect. You've built something that needs a conscience. I'm happy to be it." He hugged me then, and I knew this was the final transition. The circle was complete. I had built the company, he had saved it, and now, together, we would ensure its character would outlast us both. I walked out of the building that day into the afternoon sun. I felt a profound sense of peace. The battle was long over. The war for the soul of the company was won. Now came the gentle, endless work of tending the garden we had planted. It was the best work I could imagine. The Stewardship Council became the heartbeat of my new life, a rhythm that connected my past to the company's future without chaining me to a desk. We met quarterly, as planned. My fellow council members were a deliberately odd group. Maria from the production floor, David, the thoughtful sales head, a young data analyst named Sophia who asked piercing questions about ethical sourcing, and Charles for historical continuity. We did not meet in the boardroom. We met in the employee cafeteria, or on the factory floor, or once on a picnic table outside. Our agenda was simple. We read aloud from the growing company chronicle. We talked about the stories behind the entry. We asked hard questions. Is this decision aligned with who we say we are? Did we choose the human road here, or just the convenient one? I watched Michael sit through these meetings, not as the CEO, but as a listener, a student of the culture he was curating. He took notes. He absorbed the criticism. He never got defensive. It was the greatest demonstration of his transformation. The council had no power to veto a business decision. Our power was moral, and in a company that now valued its soul, that power was immense. After our first meeting, where we gently challenged the environmental impact of a new packaging supplier, Michael changed the supplier within the week. He sent the council a note. "You were right. The cheaper option cost us something more valuable. Thank you for the compass." I framed that note. It meant more to me than any profit-sharing check. Meanwhile, my personal life bloomed in the quiet spaces. Claire, Michael's partner, became a dear friend. She had a way of seeing the world that was refreshingly straightforward, uncluttered by corporate strategy. She and Lily would often come for Sunday dinners, the apartment filling with the sounds of a child's laughter and easy conversation. One such evening, after Lily was tucked into bed with a book in the guest room, Claire turned to me over a final cup of tea. She looked hesitant. "Eleanor," she said, "Michael told me about the ledger. The real one. He said it was the secret that saved everything." I felt a familiar, old instinct, a protectiveness that was no longer necessary. "I know it's private," she continued quickly. "I don't need to see it. I want you to know I understand its weight. He carries a copy of that first Chronicle entry in his wallet, like a prayer. I looked at this kind, insightful woman who loved my son. The secret was already out, its power diffused into the world, doing good. It's not private anymore, Claire, I said. Not really. Its job is done. It's just a book in a drawer now. The real ledger is out there, hanging on a wall for everyone to see. She smiled, understanding perfectly. That's beautiful, she said. Life has a way of coming full circle in the smallest of ways. I was at the library, reading to a group of toddlers when I saw her. A young woman, maybe 30, sitting in the back of the children's section, pretending to look at a book but clearly watching me. She had an intensity in her eyes, a familiar hunger. After the children scattered, she approached me, her hands clutching a leather portfolio. Miss Vance, she said, her voice a mix of nerves and determination. My name is Anya. I heard you speak at the business school last month about building a company with a conscience. I waited. I have a startup, she rushed on. A tiny one, just me and my cousin. We make software that helps small farms manage their water usage. It's working. We have clients, but we're struggling. The venture capitalists all want a different plan, a faster scale. They want me to pivot to something flashier. I don't want to lose the soul of what we're doing. I don't know who to talk to. I looked at her eager, worried face. I saw myself, 45 years ago, standing in a bank manager's office, trying to explain why my little kitchen table business was worth a loan. I saw the same terror of compromise, the same fierce love for an idea that was her own. I didn't give her advice. I didn't offer to look at her business plan. Instead, I asked her a question. What does your gut tell you to do? She blinked, surprised. It tells me to stay the course, to find clients who care about water conservation as much as I do, even if there are fewer of them, to grow slowly, with them. Then do that, I said. The right partners will find you when you are unwavering in your purpose. You don't need a secret ledger. You just need the courage to write the first page of your own story and to refuse to let anyone else edit it for you. Her shoulders relaxed. She exhaled a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. Thank you, she whispered. That's all I needed to hear. She left, walking with a lighter step. I realized then that my role had evolved once more. I was no longer just a founder, or a mother, or a council head. I was becoming an elder, a keeper of stories and a giver of permission. The thought did not make me feel old. It made me feel useful in a profound and new way. Later that week, I had my final meeting with Charles. We met at the Oak Room for old time's sake. He was moving away to be closer to his grandchildren. This is goodbye, for a while, he said, raising his wine glass. To the end of an era, to the best client and the best friend a lawyer could ever have. We clinked glasses. To the future, I corrected gently, and to knowing when our part of the story is beautifully, perfectly finished. He nodded, his eyes a little misty. You know, he said, I never told you this. When Michael came to me, demanding to know about your private files, I was furious. I was ready to quit on the spot. But I looked at him, this boy I'd watched grow up, and I saw the panic behind the bluster. I knew then that your plan was working. The student was finally ready for the lesson. The teacher just had to wait for him to ask the right question. You were always a brilliant strategist, Eleanor. But that was your master. We sat in the comfortable silence of 1,000 shared conversation, a lifetime of trust. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said in a glance, in a phone call, in the careful wording of a contract that protected what mattered. We said our goodbyes on the sidewalk, a long, firm hug under the street lamp. Watch over him, Charles said into my ear. He's a good man now. He has you to thank for that. He has himself to thank, I said. I just provided the mirror. I watched his car drive away, then I turned and walked home alone, under a sky full of stars. The city seemed quieter, softer. The battles were all behind me. The peace I held now was not the absence of conflict, but the presence of a hard-won and lasting harmony. I had built a company. I had raised a son. I had fought for both, and I had won the only victory that ever lasts. I had won their future. Today is my 75th birthday. The morning dawns clear and cool, the kind of September day that holds the last warmth of summer in its palm. I make coffee and take it to the balcony, wrapping my hands around the mug. I watch the city come alive below, but my mind is not on the present. It is on a threshold. Michael is coming for breakfast, and he is bringing Lily and Claire. There is a full, peaceful quiet in my apartment, the quiet of a story that has been fully told. I think about the ledger, still in its locked drawer. I haven't opened it in years. Its purpose has been served. The truth it held is no longer a secret to be protected, but a lesson living in the heart of my son's company, in the pages of the chronicle on the wall. After breakfast, there is laughter and the clatter of dishes. Lily, now 10, helps me clear the table with a solemn focus that makes me smile. Then, Michael catches my eye. He nods toward the study. We slip away, leaving Claire and Lily debating the merits of adding more chocolate chips to next week's cookie recipe. In my study, the light is soft. Michael looks at the filing cabinet, then at me. I know what he is thinking, because I have been thinking it too. It's time, isn't it? He says, his voice gentle. I believe it is, I say. I take the key from my desk, the small brass one Charles gave me. It feels cool in my fingers. I unlock the cabinet and slide out the lower drawer. There it is, the worn brown leather, familiar as my own skin. I lift it out. It is lighter than I remember, or perhaps I am stronger. I place it on the desk between us. We stand there for a moment, looking at it, this object that held so much power, so much fear, so much hope. You do the honors, I say. He reaches out, his hand hesitating for just a second above the cover, as if asking permission one last time. Then he opens it. He doesn't flip through the pages. He goes to the very back, to the last entry I made the night I wrote about him. He reads it silently, his eyes moving across my handwriting. I watch his face, see his throat work. He closes the book carefully. He looks at me, and his eyes are shining. Thank you, he says, for this, for believing I could earn a place in it. You more than earned it, I say. Now, it's yours, to do with as you see fit. He thinks for a long moment. Then he shakes his head. No, he says. It's not mine. It's ours, the company's, but not as a weapon, as a foundation. I know what I want to do with it. Will you come with me? We drive to the office together, the ledger resting on the seat between us like an honored guest. The building is quiet. It's Saturday. He uses his key, and we walk through the still halls, our footsteps echoing. We go to the production floor. He goes to the wall where the framed first entry of the company chronicle hangs. Next to it, there is an empty space. From a small bag he brought, he takes out a simple, beautiful glass display case. He opens the ledger to the first page, the very first entry I ever made, a note about a loan from a friend who believed in me when the banks did not. He places the open ledger inside the case. He seals it. Then, he hangs the case on the wall, right next to the framed chronicle entry. He steps back. On one side, the old handwritten secret, the root. On the other, the new, shared promise, the blossom. Together. This is where it belongs, he says, his voice full of emotion, not locked away, not as a secret, but as a testament. So everyone who works here can see where we came from. So they can see that the foundation of everything we are is trust and memory and the courage to write things down. I look at the two documents side by side under the glass, my past, his future, speaking to each other silently across the years. The journey of the secret is complete. It began in my hand, hidden in darkness, and it ended here, in the light, for everyone to see. It is no longer a ledger, it is a monument, a perfect circle. I take my son's hand. We stand there in the quiet factory, the morning sun streaming through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I feel a release, a final letting go. It is all here now. Everything I built, everything I loved, everything I fought for. It is safe. We walk out of the building into the bright afternoon. He carries the empty satchel. I carry nothing. We drive back to my apartment where Claire and Lily have set up a board game. We play. I lose spectacularly, and Lily's triumphant laughter is the best sound in the world. Later, after they have gone home and the apartment is quiet once more, I go to my balcony. The sun is setting, painting the sky in colors that have no name. I think about my life. It was not always easy. It was often messy and painful and loud with worry. But it was mine. I built something from nothing. I loved a man and lost him too soon. I raised a son and nearly lost him to his own pride, only to find him again in his humility. I learned that power is not in control, but in influence, that legacy is not in a name, but in a principle, that the greatest strength is sometimes found in stillness, in waiting, in the quiet confidence that the seeds you planted will grow, even if you are not there to water them every day. I am 75 years old. I have no more secrets. I have no more battles to fight. I have a son who is a good man. I have a company that is a good citizen. I have a heart that is full, and finally, at peace. The story I set out to tell is finished. This is the last page, and it is not an ending. It is a quiet, satisfied period at the end of a very long, very beautiful sentence. The night air is cool on my skin. I take one last look at the glittering city, at the building that holds my past and my future under one roof, side by side on a wall. Then, I turn and go inside, closing the glass door softly behind me. The story is done. The light remains.
If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so more people can find a little warmth and hope in these stories too.